What is up? It is a early December edition of the Splash Ag podcast. It's been a couple weeks, but now college basketball's in full swing. NBA draft and free agency just happened, and a couple days ago, there was a big trade that involved my hometown team, the Wizards, and that was obviously pretty big news. And so now today, I'm gonna bring on a first time guest, buddy of mine, Ji Hun, and he and I are going to talk all things John Wall trade and whatever tangents that may follow. So without further ado, I'm joined by Ji Hun. How you doing, dude?
Yo, what's up, Matt? Thanks for letting me join your pod. I'm pretty excited, but at the same time, pretty sad too, man. I feel like it's the end of an era, and I'm sure we can talk about it more. But yeah, 2020, man, just never stops.
Yeah, so I think you nailed it, right? Well, first and foremost, I'm also very excited to have you on. But when I messaged you, literally like a minute after the news broke, I messaged you. Were one of the first people I messaged, and I think you and I both had a very similar sentiment because you and I mean I'll let you speak on this in just a second, but me personally, like, I grew up, like, I pulled for the Wizards and whatnot, but they weren't. I'm not gonna act like they were like my favorite team. They were just kind of like the hometown team. um and though John Wall was not like my favorite player, like Kobe is my favorite player, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But the fact that I got to see John Wall, from his rookie year till he was the franchise superstar. It's something about it is kind of sad. I'm curious, like, how have you processed this trade?
Yeah, and I guess maybe to kind of give a history of my fandom for the Wizards, right? So I started watching basketball in 2005, 2006. I think the first game I watched was when Gilbert Arenas and LeBron were kind of going at it, right? And then I was like, yo, the NBA is pretty exciting. The Wizards have a pretty good team. But as you know, the Gilbert Arenas, the big three era of him, Butler, and Jameson kind of fell apart real quick, with the gun incidents. So I feel like I kind of associate Wall. He was kind of like the start of the new era, right? Like before the Wizards used to have like the blue and white collar scheme, and then Wall appeared like
Yeah.
doing it Dougie, and then I think they lost to Orlando by like 30 points or something. That was definitely not a good start, and I feel like it was weird because like whenever I would watch John Wall play, I'd compare him to Gilbert Arenas all the time, and I'd be like, yo man, he was such a good scorer, like he would have these like 50, 60 points, games, like he was clutch, just a really good performer, you know what I mean? And I think that was maybe I was harsh on Wall, at the beginning of his Wizards career. I was like, dude, this guy's not he's not Gilbert Arenas, man. This guy can't shoot. Like, this guy's just playing with a bunch of clowns. Like, this team's getting nowhere. But I feel like over time, John Wall did grow on me, and especially I think a lot of people, I feel like what the narrative around John Wall turned when he signed that big contract, and a lot of people said it, John Wall is the most overpaid player in the league. He doesn't deserve it, blah, blah, blah. But I feel like when he signed and he started talking about his mom and kind of all his struggles that he went through growing up, and, and just like how involved he's with the DC community, I think that was when I finally, accepted John Wall as like, the icon of DC sports, you know what I mean? And then as soon as that happens, like he went through all this injury debacle, so it's just kind of a disaster. But yeah, sorry, I just went on a ramble, but yeah, it's a lot of complicated sentiments, man.
Yeah, no, I'm glad. Thank you for sharing. So yeah, I mean, you started watching basketball a little before me. You're a couple years older than me.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, I never watched like peak Gilbert Arenas. I only kind of saw the tail end, and obviously there's the high profile controversy that he was involved in. But I for me, I mean, I have a like I think a lot of people, the moment he signed that supermax contract, there was a lot of conversation of, oh, he's this albatross contract and whatnot. And I think for the most part, I think anybody that signs a supermax, with the exception of maybe like three players in the league, like generally speaking, very few players are truly worth this, like that much of the cap. But that's a whole subject for another day. What I think you definitely talked about you definitely brought up some things that I certainly appreciate about John Wall. The first is that you mentioned kind of his involvement in the community and how he seemed like a guy you could certainly relate to, right? Like a dude who he was obviously very talented, but he also seemed to really care. And
Right,
you
right.
saw he was obviously spoke about when his mother passed away and whatnot. And to be fair, he also, like, for a franchise that has not won 50 games since like the 1970s and has not gone to the Eastern Conference Finals, and also I'm guessing since the 70s, like he came the closest to, 50 wins and then also getting to an Eastern Conference Finals. And to me, the singular moment I'll always remember is probably is it has to be Game 6 against Boston.
Right,
But
right.
I don't know. To me, like it was basically like 8 years of him playing and 10 years here. And to me, it sucks that he gets traded and there's this notion that he's this albatross contract or whatnot. But to me, he's an icon in this area forever.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, I guess, yeah, it's definitely interesting, right? Because I guess from our perspective, like I kind of separated the eras into like the Gilbert Arenas era and then the John Wall era, right? But I think if we were objectively speaking about it, we should really talk about it as kind of like, the Ernie Grunfeld era. And now we're kind of like the new sorry, I can't pronounce his name, but we're in the new era now without Grunfeld, right? And I was pretty excited to see how we would try to build around kind of Beal as like the alpha dog and John as kind of like the playmaker, who tries to get, like feed everyone with a better roster with Bertans and, Thomas Bryant and all these shooting around him. And I was just so excited for him to, see him finally healthy again. I was listening to a podcast the other day. I don't remember if it might have been the Low podcast. But I think he was telling whoever was interviewing him, John Wall was saying that this was the first time he was fully healthy in like the past 4 or 5 years. And like I think there was a lot of also hate on John Wall because he was really bad off the ball. He just wouldn't move.
Mhm.
I think they had a stat saying that he was the least active player or something like that. But he was saying that a part of that was because every time he would move, it would just hurt. You know what I mean? Because I think he
Yeah.
was going through issues with like his legs, some bone spurs or something like that. So yeah, I was excited to kind of see him finally fully healthy with the good management, not under Arnie Grunfeld and, with the whole community behind him cheering for him to go back. But yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly was not particularly active off the ball, but at the same time, you bring up a very good point regarding just kind of like his injury history. And the thing that, and we'll obviously see how it plays out in Houston, but the reason why I was like certainly curious, I think it's easy to be skeptical just because he went through like so many surgeries and he went through like one of the worst injuries you can have as a basketball player. But at the same time, he also had 2 years off.
Right.
And this is coming in a time period where a lot of guys were just playing in Orlando like not long ago, and um, obviously they don't have much of an off season. Like I really was curious, and we'll obviously see how he does with the Rockets. But I was really curious to see if maybe the fact that he had so much time off, if that was maybe would actually work to his advantage. So I guess we'll see about that. I'm glad you brought up this unfortunately true notion that John Wall is not particularly active off the ball.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to use that as a transition to say the guy who's replacing him, I don't know if he's particularly active off the ball either.
Right.
in Russell Westbrook. So I'm curious now that let's kind of take out the Wizards fandom. Like, how do you feel about Russell Westbrook as a fit with the organization and specifically with Bradley Beal? Because that's what's most important.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I guess just watching Westbrook, I guess, play with the Rockets at the beginning, he was so bad for them. But I guess kind of near around like the winter time, near like All-Star break, I feel like he started picking up his game. And he finished in the third team All NBA, right?
Yep.
So in a weird way, I feel like a lot of people are joking that this is kind of like a lose-lose trade situation because of Westbrook's and Wall's respective contracts, right? Dude, Russell Westbrook, he was third team All NBA, and I think next to Harden, he kind of found a niche, kind of like attacking space like from the elbow and trying to get like mid-range shots up. I guess Westbrook doesn't do very well, like shooting threes, or like yeah, but yeah, I think he'll be all right. He'll be all right next to. I mean, Paul George had an MVP caliber season next to Russell Westbrook, and so did Kevin Durant. So maybe he can help elevate Beal's game as well. But I guess more so than Beal, I'm a little bit worried about his fit with the other players, like Thomas Bryant, Davis Bertans, Rui Hachimura, and even Donnie, who, was just drafted by the Wizards. And I guess kind of my concern is, if it's just Russell and Beal kind of taking turns attacking, will those guys get a chance? I know last year the Wizards were pretty fun to watch, not because, Beal was like a dominant offensive player, but I feel like a lot of the role players kind of got to really work on their game and we got to see them improve. Like they would run a lot of creative stuff for Davis Bertans, to get a lot of threes going. And Thomas Bryant went off in the bubble. I felt like Rui made some good strides during the season. And I hope because we get Westbrook, I hope those improvements don't stop elsewhere.
Yeah, I certainly could second that. The Wizards, the defense wasn't great, but they were certainly really fun to watch. And that offense last year was pretty potent. Obviously, they played with a lot of pace, and Beal obviously took his game to another level. So it'll be very interesting to see whether he continues that kind of improvement, or I guess Beal continues to play at such an elite level with Westbrook. If anything, I think this will actually be. I think there's one thing that I actually just kind of noticed. Maybe like I woke up this morning and I was like, hold up, like Russell Westbrook started his career playing next to Kevin Durant, and he played for which coach? Scott Brooks, who's now coaching the Wizards. So I wonder if there's maybe they can get a little mojo similar to the OKC days.
Right, for sure. And I think, yeah, it is interesting because if you were to build a team around Westbrook, I feel like you would have a team that's pretty similar to the Wizards, right? Where you kind of have shooting available at every position. It's just that my concern is Beal should be our alpha guy, you know what I mean? And I think that was a little bit of the source of the tension between him and John Wall, you know what I mean? So to kind of trade away John Wall to bring a guy that's even more alpha than him in Russell Westbrook, who kind of demands the ball, is kind of seen as like a quote unquote stat chaser, and a ball hog. Even though I guess a lot of it kind of is driven from his desire to win. I do have concerns, but I think overall, just like when you look at the team overall, I do think it's going to be a very exciting team. I think a lot of people were pegging the Hawks to be the favorites to make the playoffs in like the 8th or the 7th spot. But I feel like with this trade, the Wizards are probably going to overtake the Hawks.
Yeah, I would certainly push them ahead of the Hawks, only because, like you alluded to, whether you disagree or agree, like Russell Westbrook was third-team All-NBA last year, and he was in the conversation, as was Bradley Beal, right? So you have, two of the top, 25, 30 players in the NBA, like, you could argue 20, but I would say like 25, 30 is probably more realistic. But you have two of the top guys there, and then you have some solid role players like that versus what you see in Atlanta. Like I'm gonna go with the guy who I've seen make the playoffs, by in Oklahoma City, and whatnot. But it's actually interesting, right? So I don't know if you saw, but the NBA for this season, at least, they're going to the play-in for the postseason. So that's 7 to 10 range. So my question to you is, just based on the movement in the East, do you think that this puts the Wizards in like above the play-in, or do you think that they're in the play-in in that 7 to 10 range?
Well, if I had to bet money on it right now, I'd probably bet that they would be in the play-in tournament, especially because I feel like in the East, they have so many strong teams coming back. And I feel like every team in some sense improved, right? I guess maybe that's debatable, but I guess if I were to pencil in the Bucks, Heat, Raptors, Sixers, Pacers, Celtics, Nets.
The Nets.
That's 7 teams already, right? So yeah it's gonna be pretty intense.
Yeah, it'll certainly be an interesting race, but I'm certainly with you that this makes. And I'm curious for what you think about this, but at least if you're going to compare Wall and Westbrook, I will say Westbrook is a little more durable and at least more consistent over a regular season. So I think with that in mind, I think it at least helps the Wizards with regards to kind of ensuring that, hey, we're probably going to be in the playoffs.
Right. And it'll be, I guess another interesting thing is, like it's weird because I feel like the Wizards over the years, they were kind of the team where they would kind of play to their opponent's level. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, Wall and Beal had all this trash talk about how they're the best backcourt in the league. But whenever they would play like the LeBron James-led Cavs, or like, they would play like Steph Curry, or, like kind of all these like high profile players, they play really well.
Yeah.
It would just be like the games against the bottom feeders where they were just kind of, playing to their level. John Wall's not playing defense. Beal's not getting his shots up, etc., where it was kind of frustrating. But I feel like coming into every playoffs, it would be like, like the Cavs like they would look at teams like the Raptors, who were first seed, second seed, win so many games in the regular season. They would kind of look at them as jokes, you know what I mean? And I feel like the Wizards always kind of got the respect from the opponents because John Wall and Bradley Beal were so talented. And Russell Westbrook is arguably a better talent than John Wall. So I guess even though maybe they won't rack up enough wins to secure themselves in the playoffs, I feel like no team would want to see them in the play-in tournament as their opponent. And I feel like as a higher seed, let's say you're the Bucks or the Heat, would you really want to see the Wizards as the 7th or 8th seed in your first round? I don't know. It's tough.
Yeah, I certainly can second all of that. The one thing I will say, and granted, we don't know if this is still true only because we don't know what John Wall looks like after injury, but the one thing I do think is that I do think that Wall has shown up more consistently in the playoffs from the sense that, like, I've seen Wall, be the guy in the big moments and not kind of, I don't know what the right term is, but essentially I've seen games where Russell Westbrook, it feels like he's kind of playing a little too chaotically in the playoffs and he's not playing the game methodically enough. Whereas I've seen John Wall actually elevate his game in the playoffs. There's obviously the game 6 game winner against Boston, but even then, like, he smoked the Raptors in 2015 and then, played hurt against the Hawks in 2015 as well and was really good. Had 40 something against the Hawks in 2017 and then was like pretty good in 2018 as well. So the one thing, granted, we don't know if that John Wall is still there only because we don't, these injuries, but the one thing I will say is I do hope that if the Wizards are in the playoffs, I do hope that Russell Westbrook is able to adjust better because I feel like he's always playing on one mode. And the problem is, like, it's a little less from the opposing team. It's harder to game plan for that over in a regular season game, but when it's the playoffs, like we've seen what teams do to Russ.
Yeah, and for sure, I second all of what you said. Yeah, I feel like that's what drove me crazy about John Wall because he could be so good because we've seen it in the playoffs. You know what I mean? But but then every time he would get going, like he had that hand injury against the Hawks, or and then with his recent injury that's why I was so excited because now with all this kind of hype around him being finally fully healthy for the first time, like I just wanted to see playoff Wall, be like the standard rather than the only save for the postseason. But speaking of that, how do you think? I guess how do you think John Wall will do next to James Harden and the Rockets? Do you think and Boogie Cousins, right?
Yeah. So this question it's a good question. To me, that question is super dependent on. It is incredibly dependent on what the heck is going on in Houston because there's rumors that like James Harden wanted to play with John Wall, and then there's also like the very public knowledge that James Harden wants to be traded from Houston, and that whole organization right now is in total disarray. Now, so that's the first thing, right? Like, is it possible that they're just an absolute chemistry shit show? Yeah, that's very possible. But assuming like that's, let's say Harden is, quiets down on the trade demands and whatnot. I kind of like because he's a little better of a shooter than Westbrook, and I also think that he's someone who is also a little more willing to. I think he's a little better of a playmaker than Westbrook as well. So I think that he could maybe regain some potentially all-star form while he's in Houston. But once again, I really think it's just dependent on like what the hell is going on in Houston.
Yeah. Weirdly enough, if you look at their lineups, I guess their starting 5 would probably be something like John Wall, James Harden, Eric Gordon,
I guess, and then
PJ Tucker, and then
Christian Wood,
and then
or Cousins off the bench, maybe. I do, yeah.
So I do think, like, weirdly enough, I feel like if they kept that team, that's a pretty good team. I feel like, or that's a team that I wouldn't certainly want to play against, right? I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Once again, yeah, like it's a solid team. Like, if you assume that you're gonna keep that team for the year, that should be a playoff team, right? But it's, once again, the elephant in the room is like, what the heck is going on behind the scenes? What does James Harden want? And yeah, so I mean, we'll see.
Yeah, I guess if you were to kind of predict right now, would you say the Rockets will have James Harden on their roster by the end of the year, or
Like the end of the season or the end of the
end of the
calendar year?
season, end of the
End of the
season, yeah,
season?
end of the season.
Ooh. How many years Harden got left on that deal? He's got a while, right? It's
Yeah.
okay, he can opt out in 2022. So he effectively has 2 more years. I, you know what? I think he gets traded I think he gets traded at the deadline. Actually, I'll caveat by saying this. I
Hmm.
think that if the Rockets are actually like in that top 4 in the West and like John Wall looks like the old John Wall, like pre-injury John Wall, um, and whatnot, and maybe Steven Silas is a really good coach. I think that maybe Harden sticks around and he says, you know what, let's not worry about that trade demand from earlier. If they're a hot mess though, I think he's gone by like March.
Hmm. When do you think? Yeah, where do you think he will land if James Harden was to leave? Do you
Uh,
think? I guess a popular name that's been tossed around is the Nets and the
Yep.
Sixers, right?
Yeah, I go Nets.
Nets. Dang.
But actually, and I'm curious. Well, first, let me ask you, like, before I have a sleeper James Harden destination, but I want to hear I want to hear your answers to those questions. So, do you think he finishes the year with the Rockets? And if he doesn't, where do you think he goes?
Oh, yeah, that's really tough to say. I mean, I feel like if I had to bet on it, he would probably leave the Rockets, right? Just because, like, it's a player-driven league, and I feel like the ownership, like, if they don't trade him now, his value is only going to depreciate, right? So, I think they'll probably end up trading him. My bet also would be the Nets, but it would be pretty funny if he ended up on, say, somewhere like OKC, and Houston gets like 3 first-round picks back or something. That's the troll move.
Yeah, that would be pretty ironic. My brain would actually break if I saw if I saw from Woj like James Harden has been traded to the Oklahoma City Thunder. Like, I
Yeah.
actually think that would break my brain for a moment. But I actually have a sleeper destination for James Harden, and this is
Ooh,
just
let's hear
me. This is me just speculating. I'm just having fun here. I obviously am not like sourced on any of this, but
it.
okay. So let me frame it this way. I'm going to build some suspense. There's a
All right.
team in the Western Conference
Oh, I
that
think I know which team it's gonna be.
has a very promising young player that they want to build around. This team also has a lot of assets. They recently just got a new coach, and they've also kind of underachieved in recent years.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, I think that if they decide like, hey, let's go for it, and we're never going to sign a big free agent, we got to trade for James Harden now. I wouldn't be surprised if the New Orleans Pelicans ended up with James Harden.
Ooh, who do you think goes the other way?
So you definitely throw in Lonzo Ball because look, I haven't exactly I've been kind of critical of Lonzo, but at the end of the day, I don't know if Lonzo actually take that back. Who definitely goes in the deal? I think you probably throw in like either Bledsoe or Steven Adams expirings.
Hmm. Hmm.
Do you think it's possible the Pelicans could make a deal without giving up Ingram? Is the question.
Ooh, that's tough. I guess it would kind of depend on the picks that they would throw in, but
Yeah,
I guess
that
yeah,
they have enough picks, and
yeah,
the
they got all
idea,
the assets from Drew Holiday, so
yeah. So I don't know. I mean, you could do what? You could do like Eric Bledsoe, Brandon Ingram, two future picks, and I don't know. You throw in like Josh Hart, right? Like something like that. The Pelicans have so many assets. So like, I
yeah,
feel like
that's
they can
interesting.
make it
That's
work.
interesting.
I feel like they can make it work.
That's interesting. I feel like as soon as you said the Western Conference, for some reason I thought you were gonna say the Golden State Warriors. Because like they have Clay who recently got injured, and maybe they pay they do the ultimate most disrespectful thing, and like curse the karma gods and trade away Clay's huge contract for James Harden and some get some assets in return as well. That was like a spicy one I was thinking, especially because Curry's window's closing, Dre's window's closing. Like that was gonna be my spicy pick if that were to ever happen. But Pelicans, that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean the Warriors certainly have the money. I don't know if Houston wants their assets
Right.
because I mean you throw in you got to throw in what, like either Thompson, Wiggins, or Draymond. I would argue, like, given that Clay's going to be out and he's just tore the Achilles, that's probably not super appealing to Houston. Does Houston really want Wiggins? I don't know. And then does Houston want Draymond, where Draymond is not playing, is potentially the guy or the second guy on offense? I don't know, but they could throw in Wiseman if they really wanted to try to entice the Rockets.
Right. The ultimate move that would get them cursed is something like Klay Thompson, Wiseman, and a pick for James Harden.
Yeah.
San Francisco would never recover. They'd have to go back to Oakland.
Yeah, I've certainly heard that in the ether. Now, I don't know if there's, I mean, like, I've heard people float around like hypotheticals. I don't know if that's like realistic, but I certainly could see that as like you said, windows closing, and I could certainly see them trying to do like one last run. And like the thing is, like, James is the same age as Curry, right? So, or not same age, they're like very close in age, right? So it's like, you kind of line up those windows together.
Right. But with all that said, I'm pretty excited for Houston, especially. I feel like a small subplot is that John Wall and DeMarcus Cousins are reunited.
Yep.
I feel like I remember seeing the Woj bomb that Cousins was going to sign with the Rockets, and I was like, like, dang, it would have been nice if he came to the Wizards, but it is what it is. Wall and Beal are going to, have their run back. And then I'm a frequent listener of the Bill Simmons podcast, and Bill Simmons started floating around that he was like, yo, I think Russell Westbrook's going to get traded to an Eastern Conference team. And I was like, what Eastern Conference team has a contract that can match Russell Westbrook's? And I was like, wait a minute. Does he think that he's going to go to the Wizards? Oh, shit. Boogie just signed for Houston. This kind of makes sense. And then it happened. And I was like, oh, my God. So I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty excited for Boogie to be back, especially I feel like, like people remember him from the Kings. But I feel like even when he was in the Warriors, he was pretty serviceable. Like he was still putting up really great stats. And then the injury happened while he was with the Lakers. So
yeah,
unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously gone through some pretty bad injury luck, but when he was with the Warriors, like, he was hurt, and yet what I liked, at least in that, was that I still saw him really, fight and claw in games. Like in the finals, like he was still coming up with some big plays in the 2019 finals. But you talk about this, John Wall, DeMarcus Cousins reunion. If they trade James Harden to the Pelicans and they get back Eric Bledsoe, they could just reunite the 2010. They could just reunite the 2010 Kentucky team.
Yeah, I was thinking about that when you mentioned the Pelicans. I was like, oh, Bled. It makes sense, man. John Calipari is going to replace Silas after the year.
That would certainly be something. But I mean, yeah, I think with my fake trade, we don't know, because we don't know what management wants to do with regards to like building around Zion. Like, do they want to like swing for it earlier, or like, I don't know. I feel like if you're the management, you want to be adding like these types of, max guys while Zion is still on his rookie deal.
Right, for sure. It's weird because like I feel like when they had AD, they made the mistake of not surrounding him with enough shooting, or like enough good pieces. I feel like with the Pelicans right now, building around Zion, I feel like they have pieces, but I think they're kind of making a similar mistake where they're trying to add guys who can't really shoot. Like I think Bledsoe, like his biggest, question mark coming from Milwaukee was that this guy just can't make open 3-pointers, right? And then they just recently signed Steven Adams to a huge contract. I thought Steven Adams was total crap last year, especially in the playoffs. He was a no-show. So that was kind of surprising to see. But I wonder, like, if you were to maximize Zion's game, I would think that you put him as like a small ball 5. But with kind of Steven Adams, probably eating up 25 to 30 minutes, I wonder if Zion will have enough space to, really go for his ferocious dunks.
Yeah, the Steven Adams acquisition / extension is certainly a little interesting. I wonder if they just need like an enforcer and someone to bang with the biggest bodies, just because, like, Zion, even as big as and as athletic as he is, like he's still not tall for like a quote unquote big, right?
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, I'm curious to see what the Rockets do. If I'll say this, if in a couple months Harden is disgruntled and then there's trade rumors and the Pelicans actually do pop up like on the ticker, all I'll say is you heard it here first.
Yeah, true, true. I'll give you full credit, Matt. So I guess speaking of the Pelicans and the Rockets, and we were talking about the Eastern Conference play-in tournament earlier. Which teams do you think will be in that range in the Western Conference?
Dude, here's the thing. I feel like every single team in the Western Conference, except for OKC, has playoff aspirations. And I don't think, and here's the
Right.
caveat, I don't think those teams are crazy for thinking that.
Hmm.
Like, think about it. You have the 8 teams that made it last year. OKC probably slips out, right? Then who didn't make it last year? The Suns. They just added Chris Paul. Like, they want to make the playoffs. The Timberwolves, I don't think they'll make the playoffs, but like they did just add a lot, and they obviously had the number 1 pick. The Warriors, even though they don't have Clay, like they still want to make the playoffs with Curry, Draymond,
And they
Wiseman,
signed
Wiggins.
Kelly Oubre.
Yeah, they got Kelly. And then I'm trying to think who else is there. There's the Pelicans obviously want to make the playoffs. I don't think the Grizzlies make it, but like they were close last year, so like they're obviously
Hmm.
going to try. The Spurs generally at least try to be competitive, and they're well coached and they have interesting pieces. And then who else missed the
There's even the
playoffs? Oh,
Kings.
the Kings. The Kings. I mean, the Kings. Look, once again, I wouldn't bet on the Kings making the playoffs, but like I'm a huge believer in De'Aaron Fox, and so
Hmm.
they were close. And I wonder if so. The point being, like, I really have no idea who's gonna end up in that 7, 8, 9, 10 in the West, because someone's got to lose games, obviously. But like all of these teams seem to have like reasonable expectations to make the playoffs.
Yeah, I guess you were talking a lot about the bottom of the West, but I feel like even at the top of the West, I could see just one injury or like one COVID case
Yeah, one
destroying a
outbreak.
team season.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
like
especially with like the Nuggets recently lost Jeremy Grant, they also lost Tony Craig. I feel like their biggest strength was that they had all these guys who could just come in and contribute. But they're I feel like those are two very important wings. Like 3-and-D guys around Jokic and Murray, and they also lost uh, Plumlee as well,
they
right? So
lost
they don't even
Plumlee,
have
yep,
like
and they
a
lost Craig.
so
Yeah,
they don't have a good backup center anymore. So that'll be kind of interesting to see how they do in the season without all the depth that they had. Um, and yeah, just like I guess we mentioned the Rockets. Like, will they like? I guess with the team with James Harden on it, it's really hard to write them off the playoffs. But I
exactly.
guess if we operate under the assumption that like Harden will be traded away, who knows? But John Wall redemption season,
Yeah,
maybe he'll
no,
carry them into the playoffs.
yeah, I'm with you there. So it'll certainly be a really interesting playoff race out in the West. But I think that's a good place to wrap it up. I've had you on for about 30 minutes, so I think we can
Word.
table the discussion there, and obviously have you on another time, hopefully. But I
Yeah.
appreciate you joining me today, Ji Hun.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I sometimes I lost my train of thoughts my first time being on a podcast, but this is definitely a lot of fun.
No worries. You definitely happy to have you on, and hopefully have you on relatively soon. And so once again,
All right.
thank you, Ji Hun, for joining me. And to the listeners, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe on whatever medium you're listening to this on, whether it's Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, or YouTube. And once again, thanks for listening.